Penguin Random House Audio presents Childfree by Choice, the movement redefining family and creating a new age of independence, by Dr. Amy Blackstone, with an afterword by Lance Blackstone. Read for you by Gabra Zackman, with Macleod Andrews. Introduction. We threw the party for Jay's first birthday. When it came time for cake, our guest of honor, the smallest person in the room by a long shot, fittingly selected the largest slice. It sat undisturbed on his high chair tray for just a few seconds. Soon, Jay, his chair, the floor, and as we like to retell it, the ceiling, were covered in cake. By some miracle, Jay's pudgy arms had the reach of the construction cranes he would later become obsessed with as a toddler. It was a mess. Encouraged by our laughter, Jay massaged the frosting into his face. We were happy to egg him on. Post-Jay cleanup wasn't our problem. That was his parents' job. As my nephew Jay's nanny for the first few months of his life, I brought a good deal of experience to the role. A certified babysitter since age 11, I had prior experience as a nanny and a stint in high school as perhaps the youngest church nursery head of all time. All roads pointed toward the inevitability of parenthood for me. My husband, Lance, was sure of it. Never mind that we'd already agreed we weren't having kids. Never mind that Lance had no plans to change his mind. He knew one day I would change mine. My biological clock would tick on. My maternal instinct would kick in. When the time came, Lance would silently mourn his freedom, accept it, and move on. While Lance counted the days remaining until I changed my mind, I waited for the world to catch on to a simple truth: that not having kids is a perfectly acceptable life choice. We hadn't fully come out as child-free yet, but we'd told a few people we weren't planning to have kids. The, "Oh, you'll change your minds," were a dime a dozen. No one took us seriously. It wasn't really a surprise then when my sister chirped, "So when are you two going to give Jay a cousin?" My impassioned retort brought the room to a halt. Never! The last glob of frosting clinging to Jay's flailing paws hit the floor with a thud. The news was out. We were not having a baby. While we knew that our decision not to have kids fell outside the path that others had envisioned for us, Lance and I had no idea when we made the choice that we'd find ourselves discussing it on the set of Katie Couric's talk show years later. Lance, one of very few publicly vocal child-free men, joined the audience. I took my seat on the stage along with Katie. I was there to be interviewed in my capacity as Dr. Amy Blackstone, professor of sociology at the University of Maine and a nationally recognized expert on the child-free choice. When I suggested during the interview that the notion of maternal instinct is a myth, Katie's response, "This is blasphemy," made clear just how sacred a conviction I had challenged. But I hadn't just challenged a deeply rooted conviction. I'd made visible a choice that for many, and even for myself for many years, had remained largely unseen. An invisible choice. Sociologist of gender Judith Lorber once observed, "Talking about gender for most people is the equivalent of fish talking about water." Much the same can be said of talking about the choice to parent, or not. Parenthood is so much a part of our everyday lives, from how we arrange our families, to what we see on TV and in magazines, to what we learn in church and hear from our politicians, that we often take it for granted. But while everyone has at least two biological parents, sometimes more, thanks to a 3-parent technique that in 2016 resulted in the birth of the first baby to be born with DNA from the eggs of 2 different females and sperm from 1 male, not everyone becomes a parent. In launching my research on the child-free, my goal was to better understand and make visible the experiences of people whose circumstances I did, and do, share. At the time that I decided I wanted to study the Childfree, I had just submitted my tenure portfolio and felt confident that the response would be positive. Upon reaching this milestone in my career, many of my friends were reaching a significant milestone in their own lives. They were, to use the common vernacular, starting their families. Even friends I once thought were sure to be part of our lifelong child-free sister and brotherhood were having kids. One friend, who'd declared at her bridal shower years earlier, much to the chagrin of her mother and grandmothers, that she was never, ever having kids, called to tell me that she was, quite intentionally and very happily, pregnant. Shortly thereafter, a friend from grad school, who had been on the fence about kids, shared her own good news. And though I am in no way superstitious, my friends' pregnancies always seemed to come in threes. A week after my grad school friend shared that she was expecting, a friend from work who I knew had been leaning toward not having kids shared with me the news of her own pending bundle of joy. In all three cases, I was happy for my friends, genuinely so, because in spite of their earlier hesitation, I knew they'd made the choice they wanted to make. This isn't always the case for parents, something I'll explore more in the following pages. As someone without kids, but who felt that I had started a family, I'd already built a life on my own as an adult with a household, a career, a cat, and a companion. I was struck by the notion that my family didn't seem to count, and that our friends, with whom Lance and I had once had so much in common, were disappearing. I also wondered what was wrong with me and where the batteries to my own biological clock had gone. Why wasn't I feeling the same pull toward motherhood that so many of the women around me seemed to be feeling? So, as a newly tenured professor who was seeing less of her friends as they made the transition to parenthood, and who now had a job from which I could not easily be fired, I decided to shift the focus of my research agenda to include a set of questions that I had a personal investment in. Questions surrounding the child-free choice and the experience of being child-free. I launched what has become my decade-long study of the child-free after receiving a grant from the National Council on Family Relations section on feminism and family studies. As a sociologist of gender at heart and by training, I focused the grant on discovering how gender and the child-free choice might be connected. Did women and men reach the decision in the same way? Did they think about their choice similarly? How did others respond? Were the consequences of their choice the same regardless of gender? The 50 child-free women and 20 child-free men I've formally interviewed since embarking on my research taught me that there is more to their stories than gender, though gender certainly plays a big role in shaping their experiences as child-free and how others respond to their choice. They also think about and form families in new and inspiring ways. They face workplace challenges because of their status as child-free. Some are deeply involved in the lives of children who are not their own. They lead full and fascinating lives. They're involved in their communities. And they're happy with the choice they've made. I've also learned from my students' research on the subject, including a survey of over 700 child-free women and men, which found that women experience the stigma of their choice more deeply than other child-free people. And, of course, I've learned from the decades of social scientific research on the child-free choice that precedes my own, starting with the work of trailblazers Letta Hollingsworth in the early 20th century and Jean Vevers and Sharon Hausnecht in the 1970s, to research by my contemporaries, including Kristen Park, Tanya Koropecki-Cox, Rosemary Gillespie, and Kimia Dennis, to emerging research by newer scholars that include Shelley Volsch, Brooke Long, Gillian Ayers, Braylon Sedley, Andrea Laurent Simpson, and Jenna Healy, to name just a few. Writers, filmmakers, and activists outside of academe have also informed my work. Laura Carroll has been spreading the word about the child-free choice since the publication of her first book nearly 2 decades ago. Laura Scott, author and filmmaker, welcomed Lance and me with open arms to the child-free blogosphere. Child-free pioneer and author Marcia Drutt Davis has been a source of inspiration for us. And with filmmakers Maxine Trump and Therese Schechter, I've found camaraderie and friendship, and discovered ways of celebrating the child-free choice and critiquing the motherhood mandate that are touching, hilarious, and creative. All of these writers, researchers, filmmakers, and activists, and many more, have played a role in making more visible the choice not to have children.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?